What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Game Night YouTube channel. Guys, in today's video, I've got a tutorial for Crypt Crawler. This is my very own Mint 10 dungeon crawler game, and if you're catching this as this video is releasing, as of recording this, it is October 4th, 2024, and the crowd sale launched yesterday on October 3rd, 2024, and guys, it has been amazing so far. We've sold 56 copies of the game and 34 playmats in a day. That's pretty good, man. It's pretty good for this being my very first game I've ever released. Really proud of it, and I'm so grateful and thankful for everyone who has participated in the crowd sale and purchased a copy of the game and the playmat. Thank you guys so very much. The crowd sale is going to go on for 2 weeks, so you have plenty of time. If you're catching this in October of 2024, you've got plenty of time to get in on that. I believe it ends on the 17th of October. So yeah, guys, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to head over to the crowd sale page for Crypt Crawler on thegamecrafter.com, and you can purchase your own copy. And of course, the more copies that are sold, the more of a discount you'll get. So as of right now, since 56 copies have sold, you're getting a 26% discount, $8.72 off of the game. That is pretty sweet. And the more copies that sell, the more of a discount you're going to get. So be sure to go over there and scoop one up. And while you're there too, if you want to get a playmat, hey, pick up a playmat, dude, because that's also on sale right now. You're going to get a discount on the playmat too. So, and to let you guys know, orders, according to thegamecrafter.com, these orders will ship out very early December. So it's going to be about a month or two, a little bit less than 2 months before they actually ship out. So it's a little bit of a wait, but you get really good savings that way. Anyway, let's hop into the tutorial for the video. I know that's why you guys are here. That's why you clicked on this video. So we're going to go ahead and set the tin off to the side. Of course, everything is going to fit inside of this tin unless you sleeve it. If you sleeve it, the game comes with a little red, like a little red pouch. I've got a little black one here. It's going to be similar to this, and you'll be able to store all your little dice and tracker cubes and stuff in here. Otherwise, if you don't sleeve the game, everything fits inside the tin. The cards and all the components and everything will fit inside. Anyway, okay, so let's get into how do you play Crypt Crawler. I'm going to go over each component of the game one at a time here. So the first thing that you want to do whenever you're playing the game is create a character. Essentially, the synopsis of the game is it's nothing too deep. There's not a bunch of lore that I put into the game. It's essentially you're an adventurer, you're going into a dungeon, you're fighting enemies, collecting loot, and you're searching for soul crystals in order to summon a boss and vanquish the boss, so that you can rid the dungeon of the evil that lurks below. So that's, the basic sort of premise of the game. And in order to do that and accomplish your goal of defeating the boss, you need an adventurer. So you've got a combination of a race and a class that forms your adventure. So you're going to have these two double-sided race cards here where you can be a human, an elf, a gnome, or a reptoid. And each of these cards has some statistics on them that you're going to want to be aware of. So if you take a look at the human here, we've got the armor class value. That's this little symbol that's right below the picture, and it's got like the silhouette or outline of like a suit of armor. That is your armor class. An enemy needs to roll equal to or higher than your armor class in order to hit you, and vice versa. The player needs to roll equal to or higher than the enemy's armor class in order to hit them. Next, this heart icon is your HP or your hit points. That, of course, is how much life you have or how much hit points you have. Your maximum HP is printed on each race, and it can never exceed that. So as a human, your maximum HP you can have is 17, and if your HP ever reaches 0, your character is dead and you lose the game. Next to it, you've got this little shield icon, and that is the icon for toughness. Now, toughness is a stat that modifies how much damage a character or an enemy is going to take in the game. In the case of the human, he has 0 innate toughness, so he's not going to mitigate any damage. Let's say he had 1 toughness. If you were going to take 2 damage, you would subtract your 1 toughness from the 2 damage, and you would take 1 damage. Pretty self-explanatory. Next to it, this orange diamond is your strength. So your strength is sort of like the opposite of toughness. You'll add that much damage to your attacks, and the strength stat will always add physical damage. And we'll get into damage types here soon enough. There's physical, burn, poison, and fear, but it's worth noting that your strength will always add to the physical damage. Same thing for enemies. Their strength modifier or stat will always add to physical damage. This lightning bolt symbol, that is your speed. So your speed determines who gets to attack first in battle, you or your enemy. If the enemy has a speed that is equal to or higher than your speed, the enemy attacks first. So if it's equal to or higher, the enemy will attack first. And then we're moving down to the bottom row here. This blue star, that is your stamina. Your stamina is going to allow you to put more oomph behind your attacks. It's going to allow you to put more strength behind some of your attacks, and we'll get into how that works soon. Also, we've got this this purple triangle here. That is your fear threshold. So, as mentioned, if you lose all of your HP, you lose the game. Well, if you reach your fear threshold, you also lose the game. Your character goes insane from fear and is lost in the dungeon, and you lose the game. The icon next to it, the little chicken leg, that is food. So in the case of your race card, that's how much food you're going to start the game with. So as the human, you would start with 1 food. And then to the right of that, you've got the little gold icon, and that is for your gold. That is how much gold your character will start the game with. And then lastly, you've got this little text box down here at the bottom. And for the human, it says bread. This text box at the bottom is showing which starting gear this character is going to start the game with. In the case of the human, he starts with bread. And if we check out the other race cards, you'll see that they're different. Their stats are different. They start with different things. The elf starts with the smoke. The gnome starts with the shroom. And the reptoid starts with the dart. And as mentioned, all of their stats are different, so they play differently. For instance, the gnome, he's got very high armor class, but he's really slow. He also has fairly low health. Then you've got the reptoid. He's got a really low armor class, but he's really fast. He's got some innate toughness. He's got a lot of strength, a very high fear threshold. So there's some different little, ways that you can play the game. These sort of create just different experiences and almost act as a sort of difficulty level in certain aspects too. So you could play around with those and mix and match those with the class cards to get different challenging difficulty levels and just create different play experiences. So those are the race cards. And then next to it, we've got the class cards. So the race cards make up half of your character. The class cards make up the other half. And we've got the same thing, 2 cards that are double-sided. So we've got a warrior and a wizard on this card. And then this one, we've got a ranger and a rogue. So let's go over the class cards. So of course you have the name of the class card up at the top. We got a couple little doodles here at the top. That is actually showing you what starting gear the character starts with. It's not necessary, it's more just aesthetic. And then, because those things are going to be printed on the card down here. And then we've got these 3 text boxes, and these are your skills. So your class is going to determine what skills you have access to during the game. So it'll have the name of the skill in red, Fury, Weapon Mastery, and Bloodlust here for the warrior. And then it'll have some white text, which tells you what the skill actually does. And then down below it, it'll have a little gray skull icon that matches the gray skull icon on the tracker up here. And that is your XP. That is how much, or experience points. That's how many experience points you're going to need to get in order to unlock that skill. So in the case of Fury, you would need 5 experience points. For Weapon Mastery, you would need 11. And for Bloodlust, you would need 18. And it's different on the other classes. Not all of them have the same thresholds. Like we got 5, 11, and 20 on this one. We've got 5, 12, and 20 on the wizard. So it's different. Each one's going to play a little bit differently and be either, maybe a little more challenging or a little easier depending. And then at the very bottom here, we've got, similar to on the race cards, we've got their starting equipment. For the warrior, you'll start with the dull blade and the gambeson. For the wizard, you'll start with the tome and the robe. The ranger starts with the short bow and pelt. And then finally, the rogue starts with the dagger and the cloak. And then the last thing to note on these cards is you'll notice that there are these little symbols up here in the top corner of each of the skill boxes. It'll either have a yellow sun symbol or a blue moon symbol. If it's a yellow sun, it means that that skill is an activated skill, which means that the player has to choose to activate it. If it has a blue moon, it's a passive skill, which means that the player doesn't need to choose when to activate it. It will activate passively when a certain condition or requirement has been met. So it's also worth noting too, I was going to say it's important to know that once per turn, you can activate an activated ability. but you can activate as many passive abilities as you want. So I guess you don't technically activate them, but as many passive abilities can activate per turn. So even if, like, say, Fury activates, it's a passive ability, that doesn't stop you from activating Weapon Mastery. The player can activate one of the activated abilities or sun symbol skills per turn. And you can have as many passives go off per turn. Hopefully that makes sense. I kind of worded that funky, but hopefully you get what I'm saying there. So yeah, you can only activate one activated per turn. Cool. Okay, so that's the class cards and the race cards, and those will constitute your character. So, you know, for instance, let's say you wanted to make a human warrior, right? What you would do now is you would set up your character's stats. So the 4 stats that you're going to set up is going to be your HP, your stamina, your food, and your gold. So for the human, he has 17 HP. So we would use our little cube over here on the stat tracker. Of course, if you purchase the game and you didn't get the playmat, it's going to come with this stat tracker, and you would just use this instead to track your stats. So same difference depending on which one you got. You would take this little red cube and you're going to set it up to 17. It's worth noting too, before we actually set up the stats, should tell you guys which color cubes go to which stat. So the red goes to your HP, the blue goes to your stamina, the pink or magenta purple goes to your fear, the white cube goes to your footstep tracker, the orange one is food, the gray, the sort of smoky gray one, is for your XP, silver is for your soul fragments, and then the gold is for your gold. So we set our human's health to 17. We're going to set his stamina, which is 9. We're going to put the blue cube up on the 9. And then we're going to set his food 1. And finally, his gold is also 1. And then the fear, the footsteps, the XP, and the soul fragments will remain down at 0. They'll start the game on 0. Cool. So your character is set up on his stats. Now let's get their starting gear set up. So the human starts with the bread. And of course, you'll do this, you know, whichever character you choose, you'll get their corresponding stuff. So we've got our 3 starting gear cards up here. We've got one starting gear card that's got the items printed on the back and the front. These are the items that your race will start with. And then the other 2 have the weapons on the front and the back, and then the starting armor on the front and the back. And of course, those will be used for your class. So we're playing as the human. So he's going to start the game with the bread. So you would take this card, flip it around to this side so it shows bread, and then you slide it halfway under, like that, under the race card, so that the bread is poking out the top there. Then for the warrior, he starts with the dull blade and the gambeson. So first we're going to grab our weapon, which is the dull blade. We're going to slide that halfway under the class card, and then we're going to find the gambeson starting armor, and we're going to slide that halfway underneath our starting weapon card like that, and we've created our character. Now it's worth noting too, on armor cards, which we're going to get more into, they have a durability value, which is this little icon over here to the right, this little anvil icon. So it says 2. So we're going to take one of these black dice and we're going to set it on 2 right there on that anvil icon to show that this piece of armor has 2 durability. And that's it. Our character is completely set up and ready to go. So that's the very first thing you're going to want to do in the game, and it's set up and good to go. The next thing you're going to want to do is shuffle up the dungeon deck. So this deck over here, this is a 16 card deck. This is called the dungeon deck. Now it's got 16 different maps on the top side of the card here. And then when you flip it over, this is the resolution side of the card. So these are multi-purpose cards. They act as resolution cards to resolve whenever you're moving through the different rooms in the dungeon. And they also act as modifier cards with these stats at the bottom here that will modify enemies, which we'll get into later. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go ahead and shuffle up this dungeon deck. And then once you're done, you're going to take the top card of the dungeon deck and you're going to set it sideways right here in this slot. And this is going to be the first level of the dungeon. And in order to symbolize that, if you bought the playmat, you can use the second red cube that comes with the game, and you can set it here on the 1 on the dungeon level tracker. So you can see it goes from 1 to 5. There are 5 levels that you can go through in the dungeon. You'll start at 1. If you didn't buy the playmat, you just use one of the black 6-sided dice, and you use that next to your map here to keep track of what level you're on. There we go. Cool. So now you'll notice there's a few features of these map cards. You're going to have this little staircase right here. It's going to have like a glowing light coming off of it. It's actually a little bit easier to see on this card. It's got this glowing light coming down on the staircase here. That is going to be the entrance stairs to that level. That is where you're going to set your meeple before you enter onto the level. Next, you're going to see that there's a key symbol in one of the rooms on each level. You're going to take your key and you can either set it in that room on the map, or if you don't like it being on the map, if you feel like it's getting in the way, you can always just set the key off to the side and just make sure that you take the key once you finish resolving that room, which of course we'll get into. I like to put the key right there in the room. It reminds me, and it gives me incentive to move in that direction. Cool. Then you'll notice that there's all these little rooms on the map card, and of course, you can only move into rooms that are connected by these little open hallway doorway things right here. Like you couldn't move from this room into this room because there's nothing connecting them, so you have to move through the open doorways. And then you'll also notice lastly that, or actually there's a couple things, there's this little keyhole symbol over here. This keyhole symbol is the exit door to the level. You need to acquire the key and then make your way over to this final room to use the key to unlock the door and leave the level to go down to the next level. And then lastly, you'll notice that there are these little symbols in the rooms. You've got a green circle, a yellow triangle, and a red diamond. And depending on which room you're in, what symbol is in that room, that is going to determine the outcome of the resolution card that you end up flipping over. And we're going to get into that soon enough too. So that's the map side of the dungeon cards. And then on the resolution side of the cards, we'll take a look at that. Let's see if I can get one with a symbol. There we go. Cool. So you're going to notice some things on this one. So at the very top, it's going to have one of three symbols. It's either going to have a gold coin, which means that there's a shop, or it'll have, excuse me, or it'll have a blood drop, which means that there's a blood altar, or it'll have this little fragment symbol. It looks like a little like crystal. This is a soul fragment, and that means that there's a soul shrine in that room. So those are the three different symbols. You got the soul shrine, the blood altar, and the shop, and we'll get into what each of those do soon enough. And then next below that, you've got your different outcomes. So if you are in a room that's got a green circle, you would do the outcome next to the green circle. If you're in a room with a yellow triangle, you do the one next to the yellow triangle, and same with the red diamond. Also, some rooms will have a purple star in it. You'll notice none of the rooms on the maps have a purple star, and this is so that when you push your luck in the game, there's a chance to run into something even gnarlier than the red room that you're in, and we'll get into how that works. That'll make more sense soon enough. Then you'll also notice that there's this text box down this way. This is the event text box. So you're going to have a symbol, and then you're going to have the name of the event with a little image there to symbolize the event, and then you'll have some text that you need to follow and an outcome that happens if you resolve the event. And then at the bottom of the card, as mentioned earlier, we've got these 4 different stats: HP, toughness, strength, and speed, and these will modify the stats of enemies. And we'll get into how that works soon too. So that's the resolution cards. It's everything on the resolution cards. Let's go ahead and set these back over this way. Cool. Now we're going to go over the enemies. So let's go ahead and check out the enemies. We've got 6 different enemy cards. These 2 are bosses. We'll set those over here and get into those soon. So we've got these 6 different enemy cards here, and they are double-sided. There are enemies printed on each side. So you've got 12 different enemies total. So if we check out their stats, right here, we've got their armor class. So similar to on our race card over here, every enemy is going to have an armor class. You need to roll equal to or higher than their armor class in order to hit them. So for a rat, if you roll a 2 or higher, you'd hit the rat. Next, we've got their damage outputs here. So it'll show you what type of damage it does by the icon that's printed in the box. In this case, it's got the red blood drop, which means that it's normal damage. And then it'll have a numerical value of how much damage is dealt. And then it'll have these little dice, 1, 2, or 3, 4, 5, and 6. That is going to tell you which of the damage outputs the enemy does depending on what you roll on the damage dice. So when you're rolling for damage, let's say the rat hits you. If you were to roll a 1, 2, or 3 on your damage dice, he would inflict 1 damage. If you were to roll a 4 or 5, he would inflict 2 damage. And if you were to roll a 6, he would inflict 3 damage. So the damage that they deal isn't equal to what you roll on the die. The die roll corresponds to one of these 3 different damage outputs, and it's the same across all enemies. It's always 1, 2, or 3 for the first, 4 or 5 for the second, and 6 for the third, and it's the same on the weapon cards in the loot deck, which we'll get into. Next up, we've got the enemy's loot drop and stats. So this first symbol down here with the gray skull, that is XP, or experience points. That's how many experience points the enemy is going to give you whenever you defeat it. And in the case of the rat, if you were to defeat the rat and gain the 1 experience point, you would take your gray cube on your XP stat tracker and move it up by 1. Next up, we've got the soul fragments that the enemy drops. That's the little soul fragment symbol. It's the same symbol that was on the top part of some of the resolution cards for the soul shrines. So the soul fragments, rather, are what you're trying to acquire in order to create the soul crystals. Now keep in mind, you want to collect 3 of these 4 soul crystals up here to spawn a boss. And in order to get the soul crystals, you need fragments. You need 5 fragments. So that's what this symbol represents right here. So if you were to kill the rat, you'd get 1 soul fragment, and you would move up your tracker on the soul fragment tracker here. Once your soul fragment tracker reaches 5, if you're able to find a shrine, which is one of the cards in the resolution deck that's got the little soul fragment symbol up there, you would be able to combine all 5 of those fragments and turn it into a random soul crystal, at which point you would take the 4 soul crystals, mix them up either in your hand, in the tin, or the little red pouch that's going to come with the game, and then you would pull one out at random, and then you would set it over here on your little soul tracker slots, or your soul crystal slots over this way. So that's how you're going to track which soul crystals you get, and that's how you acquire them. It incentivizes you to fight enemies. So you're going to want to fight enemies in this game. There are going to be times when you're like, oh, I really don't want to fight that guy. Like, I can't afford to fight them right now. Maybe my health is too low, or maybe they do fear or poison damage and you have too much fear or poison. There are going to be times when you're going to want to, avoid combat. There's also going to be times when you're like, oh yeah, I want to kill that rat. I just need 1 more soul fragment to make a soul crystal. So keep that in mind as you're playing. The next stat is the gold. So in the case of the rat, he drops 0 gold, but some of the other enemies will drop gold. Of course, same thing, you would just increase your gold tracker, the amount printed on the card. And then lastly, we've got a special type of loot that the enemy is going to drop. So these first 3, XP, soul fragments, and gold, all of the enemies will drop all 3 of those things. The last loot drop is going to be different between enemies. So there's a few different things you can get. If it's got this little brown leather pouch, that means that they drop a loot pouch. If it's got, let's see if I can find one here. If it's got a treasure chest like this, it means that they drop a loot chest. And there are 3 different colored gems also. If they have a green gem like this, it means that they drop a common loot. If they have a yellow gem like this, it means that they drop an uncommon loot. And if they have a red gem like the demon here, it means that they drop a rare loot. So those are the 5 different special loots that enemies can drop. Loot pouch, loot chest, common, uncommon, and rare loot. Okay, so now let's go over what each of those different loot types are. So if you pick up a loot pouch, you're going to consult this card up here. This is the loot table. On the top half of the card, you'll see there's a pile of gold with a loot pouch sitting on it. And on the bottom half of the card, there's a pile of gold with a bunch of gems and stuff and a treasure chest sitting on it, or a loot chest. Depending on which of the types of loot you pick up, whether it's a loot pouch or a loot chest, that's the table that you're going to roll on. So if you pick up a loot chest, you would take a d6, you would roll. In this case, we rolled a 1, and it shows right here there's 6 different dice. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You would just take the corresponding loot. So for the loot pouch, you can get +1 gold, a common loot, +1 food, a random potion. If you roll a 5, you also get a random potion. And if you roll a 6, you get an oil, or +1 oil, which will reset your footstep tracker, which we'll get into soon enough. If you happen to defeat an enemy and they have the treasure chest or the loot chest symbol, then you would roll on this bottom loot table down here. If you roll a 1, you get an uncommon loot. If you roll a 2, you get +2 food. If you roll a 3 or a 4, you get a random potion. If you roll a 5, you get an oil. And if you roll a 6, you get +1 soul fragment. which of course you would increase your soul fragment tracker up this way if you get that. So that's the different types of loot that you can get from the pouches and the chest. And then, as mentioned a moment ago, you can also get the other types of loot, whether it's a green, yellow, or red gem. Now, depending on which one you get, you're going to roll a d6, and you're going to take a corresponding loot from the loot deck. So this is the loot deck over this way. Has all of these cards right here. There are 9 cards in total, and they are double-sided, so there are 18 pieces of loot. There are 6 common, 6 uncommon, and 6 rare loot. Let's say that you defeat a skeleton, and he's got the green gem. That means that he drops a common loot item. You would take a d6, you would roll. In this case, we rolled a 5, and you'll notice that each of the common loots in the deck, it's got the green gem printed right there with a number 1 through 6. So you would go through those until you find the green gem with the 5, since we rolled a 5. In this case, it's the buckler. We would get the buckler. The skeleton has dropped a buckler when it dies. Okay, and then of course you would equip that to a slot down here. We'll get into that soon too. And then same thing, if they had a yellow gem, you would do the same thing. You'd roll, we rolled a 3, and then you would go through the cards that have the yellow gem, and you would look for the yellow gem with the 3. In this case, it'd be the longsword. And then lastly, it's the same thing with the rare. If you roll, we rolled a 3 again. Oops, it was a 3. Either way, doesn't matter. You go through and you find the red gem with the 3 on it. In this case, it's the rune. So you would get the rune. So that's how the loot drops for the enemies work. And then finally, we'll get into the rest of the stats on the card. We started out with the rat. We're going to go back to the rat. It's the same on all of them, but we're going to go back to the rat. So we've got their HP down at the bottom. That's how much health the enemy has. The stats at the bottom here are the same as the stats at the top on the race cards. So if you lower their health all the way down to 0, the enemy is defeated and you get the loot drops. This is their toughness, the shield icon. That's how much damage they're going to mitigate from your attacks. Then we've got the orange diamond. That is how much strength the enemy is going to add to their attacks. And similar to the human, it'll always add physical damage to their attacks. And don't worry, we're about to get into the different damage types here soon, so that'll make more sense to you. And then lastly, the lightning bolt is their speed. And of course, remember, if the enemy's speed is equal to or higher than your character's speed, the enemy attacks first. Okay, so now let's check out the damage types. So the different enemies are going to deal different damages to kind of fit them thematically. So for the rat, he does all physical damage. That's what the red blood drop symbol means. So if you ever see red blood drops on the card for their attack, it means they do physical damage. If you see these green liquid drops, that is poison. So that means that they do poison damage. If you see a purple triangle, it means that they do fear damage. And lastly, if you see a fire symbol, an orange fire symbol, it means that they do burn damage. So those are the 4 different types of damage. Let's talk about how those work. So physical damage is going to do damage straight to your HP. It's just normal physical damage. It will reduce your HP by an amount shown on the card, and you're able to mitigate that damage with your toughness from your race card and toughness from any gear that you have. Next, we've got the poison. Okay, so the poison damage type is going to work a lot differently. It's not going to reduce your HP like physical damage would, but it's going to increase the amount of poison that your character has. Now, the way poison works in Crypt Crawler is the first point of poison damage that you take, the cube is going to get placed on the highest amount of stamina that your character can have. So if you check the human, it shows that his maximum stamina is 9. And much like your HP, your stamina can never exceed the maximum amount printed on your card. You can only ever have 9 as a human. So if the ooze were to hit us and deal 1 poison damage to us, you would take this green cube and you would set that on the 9 on the stamina tracker in this case, since the human's starting stamina is 9. And if your stamina happens to be at that level, it gets bumped down by 1. So our stamina would get bumped from 9 down to 8. It's also worth noting, your stamina can never go back above wherever your poison is. So the more poison you get, the lower your actual maximum threshold for stamina goes. Also, if the poison ever reaches 0 on your stamina tracker, you're poisoned to death and your character dies. So that is how the poison works. There are antidotes in the game in the potion deck and also in the shop, which we'll go over, that can remove poison. So that's how the poison damage works. Now we're going to check out fear. So there's certain enemies like the zombie. There's also some really gnarly ones like the ghost, who does all fear damage. That is the purple triangle. The way fear damage works is it's very similar actually to how physical damage works, except you're going to track that on your fear tracker here. So let's say the ghost attacks you and he gets really lucky and rolls a 6 and does 3 fear to you. In this case, you'd put your fear tracker up from 0 to 3. If your fear tracker ever reaches your fear threshold, in this case the humans is 8, if this ever reaches 8, you lose the game, your character goes insane. So those are 3 different ways you can lose the game. If your health reaches 0 from taking too much physical damage, if your poison reaches 0 on the stamina tracker from taking too much poison damage, or if your fear tracker reaches the fear threshold printed on your character card, on your race card, you lose the game. Okay, we'll set these back here. And then finally, the last type of damage is burn damage. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. So we've got, here we'll take a look at the Warlock, for instance. So he's got the orange flame symbols for a couple of his damage. He does burn damage. Burn damage is pretty unique in the way that it functions. So let's say that the Warlock attacks and he rolls a 4. So that means he's going to do 2 burn damage. You would take one of these red dice, and you would, in this case, since he's doing 2 burn damage, you would set it to a 2 on your character. At the start of each of your turns during battle, you would take an amount of damage equal to what's on the burn counter, and it ignores your toughness. So even if you have armor that has toughness on it that would mitigate physical damage, burn damage doesn't get mitigated by that. It just goes straight through that and burns you. So in this case, at the start of your turn, whenever it's your turn to attack, you would take the 2 burn damage, so you would lower your health by 2, and then you would tick this dice down by 1. In this case, it would go from 2 down to 1. Then it would be the enemy's turn. They would attack. Then it comes back to you, assuming the enemy, is still alive. It comes back to you, and then it's the start of your turn again. You would take that 1 damage. And then in this case, it would tick down from 1 to 0, and you would remove it. Let's say that the enemy burns you. Let's say the Warlock burns us for 2 in the same scenario. And then it's our turn. We take the 2 damage. We go down to 15. We tick the 2 down to 1. We attack. Let's say we miss and the Warlock is still alive, and now it's the Warlock's turn to attack again. Now let's say he rolls a 6 and he burns us for 3. Burn is cumulative. It's going to add on. So you would add 3 to the 1. So this would become 4. And now it's our turn again to attack. Since it's the beginning of our turn, we would take 4 burn damage and go from 15 down to 11 and then tick the 4 down to a 3. So you can see how burn damage can get really, really gnarly. And it's especially difficult to deal with because it goes through your toughness, as mentioned. So that is how burn damage works. It's also worth noting, too, if you were to kill the enemy, let's say that we did have that 3 burn on us, and then, however much burn you have, as long as you have burn on you, if you defeat the enemy and you kill them, the remaining burn gets removed from the character. So once the combat is over and you've defeated the enemy, any remaining burn goes away. It doesn't persist through. Cool. So those are the 4 different damage types for the enemies. So now we'll go ahead and take a look at the bosses. So the bosses work in very much the same way. There are 2 different boss cards, 4 different bosses in total. So of course you're going to have the name of the boss at the top. You've got the dragon, you've got the demon lord, you've got the giant spider, and then the sorcerer. Sorcerer is my favorite, by the way, favorite card in the game. So the way that these work is very similar to the enemies as mentioned. You'll notice that they have an armor class. All of the bosses have 4 armor class. They're pretty difficult to hit. They also have damages that they do depending on what you roll for them in combat. They have some stats here at the bottom, their HP, their toughness, their strength, and their speed. And then they've got a little section of text. So rather than having loot drops like the other enemies do, there's no point because once you defeat the boss, that's it, you win the game. They have special abilities. So each enemy, or each boss rather, is going to have a different special ability, and that'll be printed here on that section. For instance, the dragon says, when the dragon inflicts burn, reduce all of your loot's durability by 1. Or the demon lord, when the demon lord inflicts damage to you and reduces your HP, increase its strength by 1. So they just have different special abilities like that that make them a little more unique and make them more difficult. And you'll notice they have very high health values and some pretty buffed up stats, so they're going to be very difficult. Also, what they have that's different from the enemies is this right here printed up in the bottom left corner of the art. It'll have 3 different colors of soul crystals there. So it's got these 3 here for the sorcerer, orange, blue, and green. For the giant spider, it's red, blue, and green. And then on the flip side for the demon lord, it's it's red, green, and orange. And for the dragon, it's red, blue, and orange. So for instance, if you collected 3 soul crystals and you collect your 3rd soul crystal, and I'm like, ooh, I've got the blue, red, and orange soul crystal. I can check over here. The dragon uses the blue, red, and orange soul crystal. So that's the boss that I would fight. Let's say I happen to get orange, green, and blue. I would check, okay, no, it's not these. So you'd flip them, check the others. And see the sorcerer, orange, blue, and green. So that's the boss that you would fight. So depending on which 3 soul crystals you gain, that's the boss that you're going to fight. Cool. And of course, when you defeat the boss, you win the game. All right. So now we're going to get into how the battles work. Since we're talking about enemies and we're talking about bosses, we're going to get into how the battle phase of the game functions. So whenever it is the battle phase, you're going to pick the enemy that you're supposed to be fighting. Of course, you're going to see that on resolution cards. Let's say we're fighting an ooze. If you're on level 1 of the dungeon, the enemy is going to get 1 modifier card. And in order to do that, you would take the top card of the dungeon deck, you would flip it over, and then you would slide it underneath the enemy that you're fighting so that only these stats on this this card are showing at the bottom. You place it back down, and then you would add those stats to the stats of the enemy, and it gets stronger basically. And since there are 16 of these cards with varying stat amounts, all the enemies that you fight are going to be different each time. So in this case, this ooze has 6 health and 3 speed, but had we pulled this card instead, he would have had 4 health, 3 speed, but an extra strength. So it's going to make the enemies more dynamic. So that's how that works. That's if you're on level 1. If you're on level 2 of the dungeon, you guessed it, you take 2 cards from the dungeon deck and you put both of them under it, and then you tally up all of those stats. Same thing for level 3. If you're on level 3, you get 3 and you put them under it and you tally up the stats all the way up to, if you get to level 5, the enemies can have 5 modifier cards on them, like so. And you would add up all of those stats, and that is going to create a situation where the deeper you get into the dungeon, the more difficult the enemies are going to be. All right. And of course, you can use these little black dice over here to keep track of any stats. So as you damage them, you can use these to keep track of their health. If any of their other stats get modified, like speed, strength, or toughness, you can use dice to set those on there and keep track of that. Same thing with your character. Let's say you get some extra armor class, and your armor class goes up by 1, you can use a dice to signify that over there so that you remember. Cool. So that's how the battle phase works with the enemies as far as their modifier cards that they get. Okay. And then same thing for the bosses. And the way the bosses work is they're always going to start the game with having 5 modifier cards if you make it to them. The way that you decrease this number of modifiers is by interacting with the blood altar. So there's 1 single card in this deck here. As you can see, there's only this 1 single card with the blood drop symbol on it. None of the other ones have it. This is the blood altar. So if you ever resolve this card, you can interact with the blood altar. And when you do that, you're going to sacrifice 1 HP. So in this case, we started with 17. You would sacrifice 1 HP. That allows you to interact with the blood altar. And then you take one of these red dice and you set it over here on the blood altar icon to show how many blood altars you've interacted with. In this case, we interacted with 1, let's say. Let's say we go through several levels of the game and we find this thing 3 times, let's say, and we interact with it 3 times. And then we find our 3rd soul crystal and we make our way to the boss. In this case, we would subtract 3 from the 5 modifiers that the boss usually starts with, and he would only have 2 modifiers. So let's say we're fighting the demon lord and we've interacted with 3 blood altars. You would take the top 2 cards, because 5 minus the 3 is 2, and then the boss would get 2 modifier cards. So the more of the blood altars that you find and interact with by sacrificing 1 HP, the fewer resolution cards or the fewer modifier cards the boss will have if you make it there. It's also worth noting too that when you do find a blood altar, you can only interact with it once. So if you find this blood altar, you can only sacrifice 1 HP that one time, and that's it. You can't sacrifice 5 HP at a single blood altar to get all 5. You have to find separate blood altars. You can only do it once per time that you find it. Cool. All right. And now let's discuss we've gone over the enemies. We've gone over the characters. We've gone over the maps and the resolution cards. Hopefully you guys are hanging in here. Like I said, it's pretty in-depth. So it's going to be a little bit of a longer tutorial, but hopefully you guys are digging this, and hopefully this is helpful. Let's go over the other things that you can interact with while we're on that subject. So you can interact with the blood altar, right? The next thing you can interact with is a shrine. And as mentioned earlier, to interact with a soul shrine, you need to have 5 soul fragments. If you don't have 5 soul fragments, you just don't get to interact with the shrine. But if you do, and you resolve a card that's got the soul shrine symbol up at the top, which is this little soul fragment symbol, you can set your soul fragment tracker from 5 back down to 0 to symbolize that you're combining all the fragments at this magical soul shrine, and it will turn into one of these random soul crystals. In which case you would shake them up in your hand, shake them up in the tin, shake them up in your little pouch, however you want to do it, and draw one out at random. And then lastly, you've got this gold icon symbol, which is the shop. If you find a room that's got a shop in it, you take this card here, you flip it over, and boom, you got the shop side of the card right here. Now, the shop card is pretty interesting and dynamic as well. It's going to depend on the symbol that's in the room that you're standing in. If you're standing in a room that's got a green circle and you go to a shop, you'll have access to the bottom shelf that has the green flags hanging off of it. If you're in a room that's got a yellow triangle, you'll have access to the middle shelf that has the yellow flags and the shelf below it. So you'll also have access to the green flag shelf. If you're standing in a room with a red diamond, you have access to the top shelf with the red flags and the middle shelf with the yellow flags and the bottom shelf with the green flags. So whatever room you're in, you have access to that shelf's flag colors and all the shelves below it. So obviously the red room shop is the best because you have access to all 9 items in the shop. When you're in a shop, you can purchase each item 1 time per shop. So let's say you're in a green room and you go to this shop and you have access to this bottom shelf. And let's say for whatever reason, you got 10 gold. You cannot buy the +1 health potion 10 times. You can buy it 1 time. That's it. You can buy it 1 time per shop. Then you could also purchase 1 of this -1 poison antidote right here. And you could also purchase the +2 food 1 time. That goes for every item in the shop. You can only purchase 1 of each per shop visit. If you find a new shop, of course, you've got access to those items once again. And now we'll talk about what each of the items in the shop are. So you'll notice here too on the flags, it's got a little gold icon and then a number. That's how much gold it costs to buy that particular item. So for 1 gold, you can get +1 health potion on the green bottom shelf. Next to it, for 2 gold, you can get a poison antidote that's got -1 in it. So that means it would reduce your poison by 1. And then next up, you've got the +2 food. So you would raise your food by 2 if you happen to buy that. And I'll get into what food does. Next up, we've got the +2 health potion. This one in the middle is +2 experience points. It's got the little gray XP skull on it. So when you buy that, you get to increase your experience points tracker by +2. Next to it, you've got the fear elixir with the -2 on it, and it's got the purple triangle. That means that when you buy that for 4 gold, you can reduce your fear by 2 on the fear meter. And then on the top shelf, we've got a +3 HP bottle. And of course, when you buy the HP bottles, you just increase your HP by that much on the tracker. Pretty self-explanatory. For 4 gold, you can buy an oil, which we'll go over that soon enough. When you buy an oil, your footstep tracker, wherever it is on the footstep tracker, will go all the way back down to 0. And then when you spend 5 gold, you can buy +1 soul fragments. So you would increase your soul fragment tracker up this way when you buy that. So that's all the items that you can buy in the shop. Now let's go over a couple of those things just mentioned. Food, first of all. Food can be used to increase either your HP or your stamina. So if you eat 1 food, you can increase your HP by 1, or you can increase your stamina by 1. And remember, your HP and stamina can never go above the maximum amount printed on your card. So if you had 5 food and you know your stamina's down, your health is down, you can decide how you want to spend that. You can say, I'm gonna eat all 5 of my food, and I'm gonna put 3 of it into stamina and 2 of it into HP. You can allocate it however you want. So that's what you use food for. It's also worth mentioning too that when you leave a level and you go down to the next level, any food that you have that you didn't eat spoils between levels, and your food tracker will get reset back to 0. Cool. So now let's talk about moving through the level. So when you're moving through the level, of course, you're always going to start on the staircase that's printed on the card. So we'll set that here. Now we're really getting into the meat of it here, guys. This is the actual gameplay part. There's a lot of other little things that need to be discussed first, but now we're going to get into the actual meat of how you move through the dungeon here, and it'll make more sense when certain outcomes and things pop up. I guess real quick, lastly, before we do that, just briefly, I'll mention the weapons or the loot and the potions too, since those are the last 2 things to really mention. The loot, pretty self-explanatory. It's going to have that gem color, either green, yellow, or red, printed right there on the middle of the card that we went over earlier, and then it'll be numbered 1 through 6. And whenever you get a loot, of course, you roll like we showed earlier, and you'll get that corresponding loot depending on what number you roll. Then it's going to have its damage output types, very similar to how the enemies have their attacks. So if you roll a 1, 2, or 3, you do the first damage type. 4 or 5, you'll do the second damage. And if you roll a 6, you'll do that third damage. And it does different types of damage depending on, you know, what is shown there. So you've got the red blood drop symbol will do the physical damage. And then at the bottom, it'll have a special ability that the weapon or loot might have. In the case of the spear, it says increase your speed by 1. So this would be a good instance to be able to take one of these little black dice and go, oh, my speed is going to go from 4 up to 5. And you could set that over there when you have the speed equipped. And they all do different things. So those are the weapons. Then you'll notice too that there's a little symbol in the bottom left portion of the artwork, and that's going to denote what slot that particular item goes in. So for the spear, it shows 2 hands. That means that it's a 2-handed item. So you're going to set it here between both of the 2 hands on your playmat. If you don't have a playmat, you'll just set these up down at the bottom as shown in the rulebook. It's a lot easier with the playmat though, because you actually get the little slots and you can see where it goes. So yeah, if it's 2-handed, you'd put that right there between the 2 hands on the playmat to show that it's 2-handed. If you're holding a 2-handed item, you can't hold anything in your offhand. So like you can't have a spear and a shield, because a shield would require an offhand, as you'll see in a moment. If it's got 1 hand, like the club, and the hand is on the very bottom left with the thumb pointing to the right, that is your primary hand. That's going to go all the way over here. And you can also hold an offhand item when you're holding primary hand items. Then there's going to be items like the buckler, which also have 1 hand, but it's not printed all the way in the bottom left. It's sort of set to the side a little bit, and the thumb is pointed to the left. That is an offhand item, and that's going to go right here in this slot. And as mentioned, you can hold, let's see if I can find one here. You can hold a primary hand item and an offhand item. But you can't hold an offhand item and a 2-handed. You can only hold just the 2-handed by itself. Cool. Then you've got this little helmet symbol. If it's got the helmet symbol, that means that it goes on your head. And those loot go in that slot right there with the helmet symbol. If it's got the shirt symbol, as seen here on the tunic, it's going to go right here. This is your body loot slot right there. Cool. And then if it's got a ring, like the rune does, if it's got a little ring symbol, that's your accessory, and it's going to go in your accessory slot like so. And of course, you can only have 1 head loot, 1 body, and 1 accessory loot equipped at a time. Same thing with your hands. You can only have 1 equipped at a time. You can't have multiple weapons equipped. You can only do 1 at a time. It's also worth noting too that your starting weapon that you start the game with, you always have it. Even when you pick up a new weapon and you have a weapon equipped in one of these hand slots, you still get to keep your starting weapon. And when you're in battle, you get to choose if you want to use your starting weapon to attack or if you want to use the weapon that you have equipped in your slots over this way. So you'll never lose your starting weapon. You'll have it for the entire game. Okay, the other thing to look at on these cards is the stats for the armor. Sorry guys, I told you we're about to get into the meat of it, but there's a lot. There's a lot. We need to go over this so the rest of it's going to make sense for you guys, because I'm going to show like a little example of how this stuff works. So for the armor pieces, it's going to be different. Instead of having damage outputs like the weapons do, they're going to have some different stats, obviously. So the first one's going to have a little shield symbol. And if you notice, that's the same shield symbol as the one printed on your race card, and on the enemy cards, that is the toughness icon. So with the skull cap here, for instance, if you have this equipped, it's going to increase your toughness by 1. So now we've got 1 toughness. So when enemies attack us, we can subtract 1 damage from it. Next to it, it's going to have the armor class symbol. That's the same little symbol that's printed here for your armor class. Certain pieces of armor will increase your armor class. In the case of the skull cap, it increases it by 0, but there are other pieces like, let's see, like the plate mail, for instance, that will increase your armor class by 1. So in this instance, this would be a good idea to use one of the 6-sided dice and put it here. So we'd go up from 3 to 4. So you can keep track of that over that way. So that is your armor class value right there. And then the last one has a little anvil symbol. That's the durability. So for the skull cap, it's got 3 durability. So you would set a 3 right there. Every time you receive damage and the skull cap mitigates the damage using its toughness, you would lower this durability value by 1. And when it gets all the way down to 1, and then it takes damage again, and it goes down to 0, it breaks, and the loot will go back into the loot deck to be found once again. And then last but not least, it's got some text at the bottom of some of these, much like the weapon cards, and they have special little abilities. Like in the case of the skull cap, when you defeat an enemy, gain +1 gold, and they all do different things. And then, lastly, there are the, let's see if I could find one. Here we go. There are the accessories. The accessories are very simple. They don't have any of those little symbols up here to worry about. They just get attached to your accessory slot, and they just have the text symbol. So in the case of the rune, increase your strength by 1. Then you could take a die. You go from 2 strength up to 3, like that. So those are pretty self-explanatory. They just give you little effects right there. Cool. So that's it. Okay, that's it for the loot. I believe we went through everything with the loot. Yep, we're good there. Cool. And then we've got the potions. The potions are very similar. You'll see that they have this little potion symbol in the corner of the card, and they go in these 2 slots. You can have up to 2 potions equipped at a time. If you ever do have 2 potions equipped and the enemy drops a potion that's printed on this 3rd card that's left over, you can actually just pick that potion up and drink it immediately without having to unequip or drop one of these potions. So that's something important to note. If you ever have a potion and an enemy drops a potion that's printed on the opposite side of the card, you have to decide. So let's say we had the healing potion, right? Let's say we've got a healing potion equipped. We kill an enemy and it drops a poison antidote. The poison antidote is printed on the back of the card. You have to decide, do I want to keep the healing potion or do I want to pick up the poison antidote? You have to actually decide which one you want to keep in that instance. Cool. So you can have up to 2 of those equipped, and much like the accessory cards, these kind of just do something, but then you discard them. So they'll all say, you may discard this card to ... In the case of the healing potion, you may discard this card to heal 1d6 HP, in which case you would roll a d6 and you would heal that much HP. And they all do different things. So it's simulating like you're drinking the potion, you discard it, and then you get an effect. And of course, once you drink it and discard it, it goes back to the potion deck over there to be found once again. Hey guys, game night in editing mode here. I noticed as I was editing this video that I didn't mention that potions are acquired by rolling a d6. So each of the 6 potions is numbered 1 through 6, and whenever you roll on the loot pouch or the loot chest table and you acquire a random potion, you roll 1d6, and whatever number you roll will pertain to a particular potion, and that is the potion that you take from the deck. So just wanted to clear that up. Lastly, before we move on, it's also worth noting, there's so many little rules here, guys. It's also worth noting that, let's say you've got an item like the skull cap, and let's say it got worn down, right? It's taken a couple hits, it's at 1 durability, it's about to break. If you defeat an enemy and you find another skull cap, or if you find, any armor piece that you have equipped, you can pick up that new armor piece and drop the one you're wearing, and then you would set it back to its full durability as if you picked up a brand new, fresh version of that piece of armor, much like in a video game. Like if you're playing Diablo 2 and you had a piece of armor on, you got some sort of chest plate on or something, and then an enemy drops a new fresh one, you could take off the one you're wearing and pick up the new fresh one. So it works the same way here in Crypt Crawler. Cool. Okay, Now we can talk about how the exploration phase of the game works. So we've got all the cards and their symbols and their mechanics and how they function. We've got that out of the way. Now let's go over how the exploration of the game works. So what you're going to do is you're going to, before you move into a room, you're going to move your footstep tracker up by 1. So we're going to move our footstep tracker up by 1. And then we're going to move into the room. So when you're on the stairs, you'll just move into the first room that the stairs are connected to. In this case, the room has a green circle in it. What you're going to do next is take the top card of the dungeon deck, flip it over face up like so, and then you're going to find the symbol that's in the room that you're in. So we're in a green circle, so you got the green circle. Next to it, it says +1 fear and comma and 1 skeleton, which means that if we choose to resolve this card, you resolve it from left to right. We would get +1 fear, so our fear would go up by 1. And then we would have to fight a skeleton, in which case, and let's assume we're on level 1 here, which case we would go through the deck. We would find a skeleton in the enemy deck. We're on level 1, so we would take the top card of the resolution deck, and we would set that under it as its modifier card to add to its stats. And then depending on whose speed is higher, that's who would go first. Remember, if the enemy speed is equal to or higher, the enemy will attack first, and then you proceed to battle. And we'll get into how battle works in just a moment too. Let's say you defeat the skeleton, and then you'll see once you complete that bit of it, you'll check to see if the symbol of the room you're in matches this symbol in the event box down here. If it doesn't, you ignore the event. If it does match, let's see if we can find one that does match. Let's see. We're looking for a green circle. There we go. Let's say that you're in a room like this. So we're in the green circle room. Once you finish resolving the top part of the card, then you go to the event part. So it's got the green circle. That means that there's a campsite in the room. And then you would read it. A ring of stones surrounds burnt logs and ashes. A leather bag rests nearby. And then it's got some outcomes down here. If you roll a 1, 2, or a 3, you get the first outcome. A 4 or a 5, you get the second outcome. And if you roll a 6, you get the third outcome. So you would just roll a dice. 5, in this case, we would get 1 food and 1 oil. So that's how the events work. And then lastly, the very last thing you're going to do, once you're done resolving the top bit, matching the symbol of the room you're in, and once you're done resolving the event, if the event symbol matches the symbol of the room you're in, you'll check the symbol at the very top of the card, and it'll either be the blood altar, the shop, or the soul shrine, and then you can interact with that special location in that room last. So in this case, it would be the blood altar. If we took that +1 fear, we defeated the skeleton, then we can interact with the blood altar, and we'd say, okay, I'm gonna set my I'm gonna sacrifice 1 HP at the blood altar, and then I get to put the cube, the dice over here on the blood altar icon right there. Cool. Same thing for the shop and for the soul shrine. Sweet. Okay. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about how the push your luck mechanic works in the game. So let's say that we're moving from this room over here into this red diamond room. First, we're going to take a step on the footstep tracker, move into the red diamond room. We'll flip the top card, and we'll see, ooh, it's got a goblin and a gold in that room. Now, we can choose to either resolve the room, in which case we'd have to fight a goblin, and then if we're still alive, we get to pick up 1 gold, and in this case, we'd get to interact with the blood altar if we wanted to. Or, let's say for some reason we're like, nah, I don't really want to fight the goblin. I've got plenty gold. I don't want that. I'm looking for something else. I really need to find a soul shrine. I want to push my luck. You can do this once per room you enter. We can take the next card from the deck, flip it over, and then you'll notice that the cards have red text for some of the outcomes. That's the outcome you're going to have to resolve if you push your luck. So in this case, we would have to resolve this text that says 1 ooze, or it says 1 banshee in black text, and we'll get into that in a moment too. When you're in the light, you're going to resolve the first portion of the card, and if you're in darkness, you're going to resolve the second portion of the card. And like I said, we'll get into that in just a moment. So you resolve the red text. So let's say that this is the first card that we flipped, and we're like, no, I don't want to fight that. I want to push my luck. You would flip, boom, same thing. You'd have to fight an orc in this case. If you pushed your luck, and you can only push your luck one time. You can't keep pushing your luck over and over again. Let's say that we took another step, and we moved into this green room, and we got a goblin. And we're like, no, I don't want to fight the goblin. You push your luck, and we pushed into a warlock. It's the red text. So it doesn't matter that the symbol doesn't match anymore. If you push your luck, you just do whichever the red text is. Cool. And then the same thing for the events. So like in this case, we pushed into a warlock, and it's got the yellow here. Let's see if we can get one that matches up. Like for this one, for instance, if you push into this one, it's got the troll next to the purple. It's printed in red next to the purple star. That purple star is also in the event box down here, which means that if you push your luck into this room, you would have to do the event also. So it doesn't matter that the symbol in the room you're in doesn't match the event. You match the symbol of the event to the red text when you push your luck. Let's see if we can get another one for another example. Yeah, here's another perfect example. If we pushed our luck into this card, it says 1 common loot in red. So that's the event that's the outcome that we have to resolve. Next to it is the yellow triangle, and that matches the event triangle. So that means that there's also a grove in the room. If you ever push your luck into red text and the symbols don't match, let's see if I can find one. Like in this case, if we pushed our luck into this card, there's a rat and a food. The green circle does not match the yellow triangle event symbol, so that means that we would not resolve the event in that case. So that's how pushing your luck works. Now let's talk about the light mechanic in the game, because that's going to tie into how pushing your luck works in the game too, which ones you have to resolve. So let's say that your footstep tracker reaches all the way to the 10, okay? Let's say you're at 9 and you move into the next room and you move your footstep tracker up to 10. On your following turn, when it's your turn to move again and you can't increase your footstep tracker anymore, your lantern burns out and you'll flip your lantern to the side that shows that it's unlit. Now, every time you move, you have to increase your fear tracker by 1 to simulate the fear that your character is accumulating as they move around in the darkness in the dungeon. And remember, once your fear tracker matches your threshold, or reaches your threshold rather, you lose the game. If you're in darkness, it's also going to affect the outcomes on certain cards. So let's say we go into, let me see if I can find a good example here. Yeah, let's say that we moved into this red room, and we look at the red. It's like, okay, there would be an ooze. If the lantern was lit and we were in the light, we would have to fight an ooze and we would ignore the second half. If we're in darkness, you ignore the first half and you look at the second half. There's like a little dot right here, a little circle in between the two outcomes. You would do the second one in black text that's outlined. In this case, it says 1 Banshee. It might be a little bit hard to see on camera. I assure you, these are perfectly legible and easy to read in person on the actual cards. So in this case, it would be a Banshee. Let's say you're like, ooh, I don't want to fight a Banshee. I'm going to push my luck. Let's say we push our luck. Perfect example. You look at the red text. It says 1 orc and 1 Banshee. Well, we're not in the light, so we're not going to worry about the orc. We're going to worry about the black text. Since our lantern's burned out, we would have to fight a Banshee. So we skip that first Banshee, and we would, in this case, we would end up pushing into a Banshee. And then in which case you would take out the Banshee card and you would fight the Banshee. So that's how the exploration part of the game works and how you resolve certain outcomes on the card. So remember, you always resolve the top bit first, the symbol. If you're in light, you resolve the left portion of the outcome before the dot, if there is one. And if you're in the darkness, you resolve just the right portion after the dot that's in black text and outlined in either white or red. And then after you resolve the top part of the card, if the symbol of the room you're in matches, or if the symbol of the red text that you push your luck into matches the event symbol down here, then you resolve the event. And then lastly, if the card has a soul shrine, a shop, or a blood altar symbol at the top, you resolve that. Cool. All right, guys. Now we're going to get into combat. Or I guess one last thing to mention too. As you're moving through these rooms, whenever you leave a room, always take a clear cube and put it in the room that you just left. That is to symbolize that that room is cleared. You have cleared that room, you looted it of all of its loot, you killed the enemies that were in there. So that way, if you ever have to move back through a room that's been cleared, you do not resolve a resolution card. You just spend your movement on the tracker to move into that room, and then you have to spend another movement to leave that room. So it just shows that those rooms are cleared, and this prevents players from just kind of hopping back and forth between rooms and farming them and never having to leave the level. And then ultimately what you're trying to do on each map, each level, is make your way over to the room with the key. Once you have resolved the resolution card for that particular room and everything is resolved and you're still alive, then you can pick up the key, set it over here by your character, and then you want to start working your way over here to the locked door. Once you get to that final room and all of the resolution card outcomes have been completed here, and you've completed all of that, then you can use the key to unlock the door and leave the level, and that is going to require you to move one space on the footstep tracker in order to leave the level. Then you would move all of the cubes off to the side, you would turn this card face up, put it in the discard pile, then you would take the next top card of the dungeon deck, set it here, move your tracker to 2 to show that you're on dungeon level 2 or whatever level of, level 3 if you just finished level 2, so on and so forth. And then you set up the dungeon card once again. You put your meeple on the stairs, you put the key in the room with the key symbol, boom, you're ready to go. And when you move into that first room, of course, it's going to require a movement to go in, and every subsequent room that you move into requires a movement to move in, and keep track of the rooms you've cleared with your clear cubes. That's it. It is that simple. Hey dudes, it is game night from the editing booth once again, and I wanted to let you guys know that if you reach the end of level 5 of the dungeon and you have explored every room in level 5 of the dungeon and you still have not found all 3 soul crystals, you lose the game. You are trapped in the dungeon forever. I forgot to mention this while I was doing the tutorial, so I figured I would insert that here in case anybody had any questions or were just confused about what happens if you reach the end of the game and you're like, okay, I'm at the end of level 5. I don't have my soul crystals. Now what happens? You lose. So if you explore all the rooms on level 5 and you don't find all 3 soul crystals, you lose the game. Okay, back to the tutorial. Now we're going to go over combat, and I think that's pretty much going to be it, guys. I know this is a long video, a long tutorial, but a couple of you guys were asking, for a more in-depth tutorial, and I really want to give you guys all the ins and outs of the game. So I apologize that it's so long, but I want to be as thorough as possible so that if you guys have any questions, hopefully you can just refer back to this video. Cool. And of course, if you do have any questions, any things that I might have left out, ask me down in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions for you guys. Okay, so combat. Combat is going to work like this. So let's say that we're fighting a skeleton, right? Let's say we're on level 2 and we're fighting a skeleton. We're going to take the top 2 cards of the dungeon deck. Since we're on level 2, it's going to get 2 modifier cards. We're going to set it up like so. So that's got 2 modifier cards. So this skeleton is going to get +1 health. So it's going to have 5 HP, like so. He got no extra toughness, no extra strength, but he did get 1 extra speed. So his speed goes up to 5. So if we want to, you can keep track of these, or you can just add them up on the card if you'd like, however you'd like to do it. But I've provided plenty enough dice that you can keep track of all of this stuff. Next, let's say that we've got some gear, right? Let's say that we've got, let's go all out, dude. Let's say we got a mace on us. Let's say we've also got a buckler, and then maybe we got some good stuff too. Maybe we've got ourselves some chainmail armor, and that ought to be pretty good. Let's say we got that going on. And let's say we've also got, who knows, let's say we got a health potion as well, a healing potion. Okay, so we would check the enemy's speed. He's got 5 speed, we've got 4. So his speed is equal to or higher than ours. The enemy gets to attack first. You're always going to be rolling 2 dice in the game. A black dice for your to hit dice, and then the red dice is the damage dice. So the black dice needs to roll equal to or higher than the armor class in order to hit, and the red dice is going to deal damage depending on what you roll, corresponding to the different damage outputs on the enemy or the different damage outputs on your weapon. So the skeleton's going to attack first. Our armor class is normally 3, but since we've got the chainmail, our armor class gets +1, so we've got 4 armor class. It's also worth noting that the chainmail has 4 durability, so we're going to put a 4 on it. And the buckler has 3 durability, so we're going to put a 3. There we go. The skeleton's going to attack. He needs to roll a 4 or better on the black dice. He doesn't. He rolls lower, so he misses. Doesn't matter what the red dice is. Then we're going to attack. We need to roll 3 or better since the skeleton's armor class is 3. We roll a 6, which means that we rolled equal to or higher than the armor class, so we score a hit. Now we look at the red dice. We rolled a 6. The 6 on the mace does 3 damage. So since we rolled a 6, you can see here, if you roll a 6, it does 3 physical damage. It also says When you inflict damage with this weapon, reduce the enemy's toughness by 1. So we're going to take our 3 damage and we're going to add our strength to it. Our strength is 2. So we're going to deal 5 total damage. Now we're going to check the enemy's toughness. The enemy has 1 toughness. So we're going to subtract the 1 toughness from the 5 damage. We deal 4 damage. Now the mace is also going to reduce the enemy's toughness by 1. So it doesn't reduce the toughness when you're dealing the damage, but it will, once you hit them, it symbolizes the mace bashing up the enemy's armor, and now the skeleton's toughness will be reduced by 1 permanently for the rest of the battle. So now he has 0 toughness. So now future hits, he won't mitigate any of that damage. So we could just do the 4 damage to him and put him down to 1, or we can use our stamina. This is where stamina comes in. Remember stamina all the way back from the first part of the video? Stamina will allow you to add more power behind your attacks. For each successful attack during battle, you can spend up to 3 stamina in order to increase the damage by 1 per stamina spent. So if you spend 1 stamina, you increase the damage by 1. If you spend 2, you increase it by 2. And if you spend 3, you increase it by 3. You can't exceed 3 stamina spent per attack. So in this case, if we wanted to, we could spend 1 stamina to add 1 damage to our attack to make that 4 damage go up to 5, and we would one-shot the skeleton and defeat it. In which case, we would gain 2 XP. We would gain 0 soul fragments, 1 gold. We'd gain 1 gold, and then we would get a common loot. So we would roll. We rolled a 5. We've already got a buckler, so we don't get any loot. Let's say we didn't have the buckler and we rolled a 5. We would get to go through the loot deck and pull out the common 5, and then equip it, and boom, we've got a buckler. And then you set up your durability and you're ready to go. Let's say that we didn't kill the skeleton. Let's say that the skeleton is the one that rolled double 6s and hit us. So he rolled equal to or higher than our armor class, and then he rolled a 6 for damage. So he's doing 4 plus his 1 strength is 5 damage. Now, as long as you have armor that has toughness, you have to use the armor to mitigate the damage. Let's say that you had a suit of armor on in real life and somebody bashed you with a sword. You can't go, you know what, I'm going to actually just take that damage to my health and not to my... No, it doesn't work that way. They hit your armor. So you have to use your armor's durability. You can't decide not to. So as long as you have armor equipped, you're going to reduce the damage that the enemy deals by the amount of toughness printed on your cards. So in this case, the enemy is dealing 5 damage. His 4 plus his 1 strength is 5. With all the armor that we have on right now, we're getting 1 toughness from the chainmail, 2 toughness from the buckler, and 2 toughness from our gambeson for a total of 5. Our character has 0 over here on his race card. Only the reptoid has 1 toughness, so you would factor that in too. You would actually factor that in last after you factor in all of the other equipped gear. In this case, we don't have that, but we are mitigating 5 damage. That's exactly how much the enemy is doing, is 5. So we would take 0 damage to our health. But what does happen is we have to tick down the durability of each of these pieces of gear because they're soaking up that damage. So that's going to simulate them wearing down and taking damage like so. And of course, when these reach 0, they break and they go back into the loot deck. It's editing game night once again. I wanted to mention here too, it's important to point this out, guys, that if you were to take damage that is less than the total toughness of all the armor that you're wearing, you don't have to use every piece of armor to block that damage and then reduce the durability of every piece of armor. You can pick and choose which pieces of armor will block the damage. So let's say, for instance, in this same scenario in the battle against the skeleton, let's say that the skeleton rolled a 1, 2, or a 3 for his damage dice, which would do his first damage, which is 1. And then you would add that to his strength of 1 for a total of 2 damage. We could choose to put that 2 damage on any of the pieces of armor that we have. So in this instance, we could use the buckler. The buckler has 2 toughness. We could block that 2 damage with just the buckler, which would reduce the durability of our buckler by 1, and then our chainmail and our gambeson would stay the same. They wouldn't take any damage. Or we could use the gambeson. Since the gambeson has a toughness of 2, we could use just the gambeson to block that 2 damage and reduce the durability of the gambeson. If we wanted to make this bad decision, we could block it. We could go, I'm going to block the 2 damage with the chainmail. The chainmail only has 1 toughness, so you would reduce the durability of the chainmail by 1, but then we would still have 1 damage left over that we would have to block, and we would have to either choose to put that on the buckler or the gambeson, in which case you would also reduce the durability of either of those by 1. And of course, you don't want to do that. That's just bad. If you can soak up all the damage on one piece of armor, obviously that's what you would do. But just to give you guys an example, that's how it works. If you take less damage than the total sum of all the toughness that you have from your armor combined, you get to put that damage on each armor, or you get to use each particular armor piece to block that damage, and then only reduce the durability of the armor pieces that were used to block the damage. But as I stated in the tutorial, keep in mind, you cannot choose to take the damage. You couldn't take that 2 damage in this instance and say, oh, I'll block 1 with the chainmail and I'll just take the other damage. It doesn't work that way. And you can't say, I'll just take the 2 damage and not block any. You have to block the damage with any of the armor pieces that you have equipped. So hope that clears that up for you guys. You'll continue back and forth taking turns like this, the enemy attacking and you attacking, until either you die and the game is over, or you defeat the enemy, in which case you defeat them and pick up, you get their loot drops. You get the XP, the soul fragments, the gold, and whatever loot they may drop. And that is how the battle works, just like that. It's worth noting too, as mentioned earlier, if you take burn damage, the burn damage is going to ignore any toughness that you have. Cool. We'll go ahead and set these over this way. And then it's going to be the same thing when you're fighting a boss, except when you defeat the boss, you win the game. So that is how you win. You need to collect all 3 of the soul crystals, summon the boss, and then reduce the boss's HP down to 0, and you'll win the game. There's also a couple other little things to mention. As mentioned earlier, strength only increases your physical damage. So let's say that you're fighting an enemy like the ooze. Okay? Let's say you're on level 1 and you're fighting an ooze, and he's got his one little modifier card. And let's say the ooze attacks and he rolls double 6s again, okay? So he rolls higher than or equal to or higher than our armor class, so he does hit. And then with the red dice, he rolls a 6. So you check over here, his 6 damage, or his 6 roll does 3 poison. Let's give him some, let's give him a modifier that gives him strength too. Let's see. There we go. Let's give him a different modifier here for this example. Okay, so he's getting +1 strength from this modifier. Normally he has 0. So he would be doing 3 poison, and then he's got the 1 strength. That does not increase his poison damage. He's not going to do 4 poison. He's going to do 3 poison and 1 physical damage. So that physical damage can still be blocked by any armor pieces that you have equipped. If you don't have any armor equipped, you would just take that physical damage. Let's say you had no armor equipped. You would take 1 physical damage, so your health would go down by 1, and you would take 3 poison, so you know your poison would go down too. If you did have armor, let's say that you did have some armor on. Let's just say you had the chainmail equipped. In this case, you would mitigate that 1 physical damage with the 1 toughness of the chainmail, so you would lose the durability on the chainmail. But then you would still take the 3 poison damage, and you would track that over here with your poison tracker cube. So it's worth noting that if you take burn, poison, or fear damage, that is not stopped by armor. That will not get blocked by any of your armor. It's going to always hit you. So as long as they roll high enough, equal to or higher than your armor class to hit you, that poison, fear, or burn is going to go through and affect you. It can't be stopped by armor or by toughness. There are some pieces in the game, armor pieces in the game, like the helmet, for instance, that will reduce the amount of fear inflicted to you by 1. The plate mail will reduce the amount of poison inflicted to you, and the shield will reduce the amount of burn inflicted to you. Also, the ring will reduce the amount of all 3 of those types of damage inflicted to you. So there are ways to reduce that damage, but not through toughness. So I think, guys, that is about it. I think I've covered pretty much everything. It's also worth mentioning too that your starting gear over here, once you use that, they're pretty much just one-time use cards, sort of like potions. Once you use them, it says you may discard it. You just discard it up this way to the starting gear pile, like so. And eventually your starting armor will likely break, so the only thing you'll be left with that you started with was that weapon that you keep for the entire game. And as mentioned earlier, when you're in combat, you get to decide before you roll to attack. Let's say we're fighting that ooze, you could say, do I want to use the mace or do I want to use the dull blade? And you choose which one you're going to use before you roll. So yeah, guys, so that is how all of that works. Also, as mentioned earlier, when you find oil, depending on where your footstep tracker is, you're going to set that all the way back down to 0. And if your lantern is unlit when you find oil, you get to relight your lantern and flip it back over to the lit side. And then you get to move once again on the footstep tracker instead of using the fear to move like so. Couple other things worth mentioning. Just like with the HP and the stamina can never exceed the maximum amount printed on your card, there are certain stats that can't exceed a maximum amount. You can never have more than 5 food. So once your food reaches 5 on the tracker, you can't have any more of that. There's a little bug. Come in and join the game. If you have 10 gold, same thing. You can't go above 10 gold. And if you have 5 soul fragments, you can't carry more than 5 soul fragments. And if your XP happens to reach 20 and you get all of your skills, then that's it. You don't have to worry about leveling up anymore. You have reached your max level. Also worth mentioning too that during combat, as mentioned way earlier in the beginning of the video, you can use one of your skills per turn during combat on your turn. So let's say we're fighting the ooze and we're the warrior and we want to use weapon mastery. We can use that once on our turn. And a lot of these abilities will say once per battle, like weapon mastery says once per battle. So that just means once for that entire battle. Some of them might say once per turn. Some of them might say once per dungeon level, which means you can only use that once until you leave the current dungeon level that you're on. So that is pretty much it, guys. I think we have covered just about everything. Yep, I think we've covered just about everything. This video is very long. This is a long tutorial. I apologize it's so long, but like I said, I wanted to make sure that I got all of this explained somewhat concisely and so that you guys understand all this. Ooh, one last thing I've just noticed before we go here. The lucky coins. I forgot to mention the lucky coins. This is the last thing to talk about. You're going to start the game with 3 lucky coins. Whenever you roll to attack an enemy, let's say that we're fighting the ooze and we rolled a 1, right? We need to roll equal to or higher than his armor class to hit him. We need to roll a 2 to hit him. We rolled a 1. You can spend a lucky coin by flipping it to its reverse side to increase your to hit dice by 1 number. That's all you'll ever use the lucky coins for. You can't use it to mitigate the enemy's attack dice or anything like that. You only use it for your to hit roll. Not for your damage roll, but for your to hit roll to hit their armor class. Let's say we were fighting a different enemy. Let's say we were fighting something that had a little bit higher armor class like the skeleton, and we rolled a 1 in this instance. You can spend as many lucky coins as you want per attack. So I could say, you know what, I'm going to spend 2 lucky coins and bump this 1 up to a 3. 1 per lucky coin spent, and now I'm equaling his armor class, and now I'm hitting him. Once these lucky coins are spent, they're spent and they're gone. So use these wisely. These are to mitigate, some unlucky rolls, and you can choose to use these in whatever circumstance you want. You can blow them early on easy enemies, or you can be a little bit more conservative and maybe try to hang on to them until you get into a really gnarly fight with like a demon or a troll or just some really statted out enemy that has a bunch of modifier cards on it. You can use these to mitigate some of that luck and increase your to hit rolls with the coins. Okay. Now I think that's it. I think that is everything. So I'm not going to make the video go on too much longer here, guys. Thank you so much for making it through the video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those down in the comments below. There's a rule book for the game, so you can go ahead and read through all this stuff in the rule book if you'd like. I have playthroughs on the channel. You can go check out those playthroughs. There's going to be many more playthroughs to come. And even though I made like a sort of official tutorial video here, really going in depth into each thing, honestly, I highly recommend just watching playthroughs of the game. That's really going to help you learn how the game flows and see how it actually plays. So now that you've got all of this base information here about every aspect of the game and how it works, those playthroughs are going to make a lot more sense and you'll be able to see everything in action. I don't want to do a playthrough here in this video. The video will be 3 hours long, so we're already over an hour here. So there it is, guys. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope you enjoyed this in-depth tutorial on how to play Crypt Crawler. And once again, leave me those comments down below if you have any questions or concerns, and I'll be happy to address those. So thank you guys for watching. Be on the lookout for more playthroughs coming very soon. And until then, have a good one. I'll see you guys in the next video.